In this video, I want to talk about specific strategies that corporations, mostly in the tech sector, use to exploit legal loopholes and gain an unfair market advantages. I'm being very polite when I call it a legal loopholes, because subjectively and from my perspective as a someone with a legal background, it's look like outright corruption. However, this is just my personal, subjective opinion. I am simply going to lay out my thoughts and arguments, and the final judgments is entirely up to you. As an example, I am going to look at Uber, the food delivery and ride service, and the Polish government, since I live here. I will not dive deep into what the company is, its history, philosophy, or strategy, because none of that really matters. Instead, I will just explain exactly how Uber and similar corporations operate within Poland. Frankly, I believe they use pretty much the same approach across the entire Europe. So here's how it works. There is a company offering its services. One of these services is an app that connects a customer with the service provider. And that is it. It's just a service aggregator, nothing more. Zero accountability. I would say the business model boils down to this.
The profits are ours, but if anything goes wrong, the problems are yours.
Of course, some might argue with that, but behind the whole screen of the advertising, PR, and how the company positions itself in the market and among people, deep down, buried under the ton of legal papers, there is always a line that says, you might say,
Okay, a website or an app that aggregates clients and providers is one thing, but food delivery or passenger transport is different. That is a direct provision of services by the company.
and probably you damn right. They even have tech support, driver verification, account bans, and most importantly, actual cars with Uber branding on them. Well, that's how it looks on the surface, but on paper, that an individual cannot work directly with Uber. There is simply no such options. Why? Well, because if anything were to happen, like a car accident or even worse, Uber will be held liable. But this way, as we remember, on paper they are just an application, a mere aggregator and nothing more. Your Uber driver is actually just an employee of a company that provides taxi services to the Uber. In other words, you have a taxi driver hired by a certain company. This company operates its own fleet and provides taxi services. And this company partners with Uber as a subcontractor. Once the services are complete via the application, Uber pays this company for the work done. And that's it. This is a very simplified breakdown, just to give you the general idea. Now, you could argue about this and hold different economical and political views on the free markets and the restrictions of the entrepreneurial creativity and genius. If the law allows for loophole, then it's just a flaw in the legislation, not a problem with the private enterprise. I actually agree with that, but there is one thing I do not agree with, and that is when it turns into a blatant abuse of rights and the legal system. Because those partners companies I mentioned earlier, the one providing the taxi services, how can I put this politely, don't exactly play by the rules. Now, let me tell you how Uber drivers in Poland actually operate and how they are officially registered. Uber takes a 30 to 40% cut from the payment. The remaining balance from the trip is then transferred by Uber to the partner company's corporate account. The taxi partner takes their own fee as a reward. I should mention, it's not a huge amount, but that's besides the point right now. Now, to legally work as a taxi driver, you either need to be registered as the sole entrepreneur or be officially hired by a licensed transport company. So here's what happens. The taxi partner pays the rest of the money to the driver based on a fractional employment contract, like 1/8 or 1/4 of the full-time hours at minimum wage. Let me break this down a bit more. If a taxi driver brings in, say, 3,000 to 4,000 euros after Uber's and the partners' commissions, and if they were fully and legitimately employed, they would have to pay taxes on the entire amount. Income tax and social security contributions would eat up about 30 to 40% of those earnings. But if you are officially employed for the bare minimum allowed by law, say 100 euros per month, then you only pay taxes on that specific 100 euros. So this begs the question, how exactly does the driver receive the rest of the money? There are many ways to do it, but they all lead to the same loop. Drivers rent out their own cars to the very same partner companies they work for. Then, at the end of the month, the remaining balance, let's say 2,900 euros, is transferred to their bank account as a car rental fee. In theory, the driver only has to pay a flat 8.5 tax rate on this rental income and say goodbye to the 40% tax on your total earnings. At this point, you think the triumph of capitalism and socialism should be playing on the background. Everyone is happy, the corporation made its money, and the hard-working driver legally kept the lion's share of their earnings. But there's one big question. Is it actually legal? Masterminds behind the approach argue that since the options exist, it must be lawful. But the fact is, the existence of the legal payment method does not automatically make the earnings themselves legal. Just swap the taxi service with any other industry, for instance, dentist.
What's my hourly rate as a dental specialist? I don't know. I just rent out my chair to my employer.
Or construction.
I work in construction, but I also rent out my tools to my employer, and I get paid most of my salary just for renting out my tools.
While at the same time working and providing the actual service. And instead of paying 30% in taxes, they only pay 8.5%. I hope you catch my idea. You, my unsubscribed viewer, might say,
"Come on, leave the poor taxi driver alone and get off his back about his earnings."
earnings? If only it were actual earnings. All the amounts I mentioned earlier are gross figures, without deducting the cost of fuel, car rental, wear and tear, insurance, and other expenses. To make a decent living, drivers using the apps are forced to pull 40-hour shifts 6 days a week. Meanwhile, the big corporations are fully aware of these schemes. They actively exploit them while pocketing their own generous 30 to 40% commissions on every single ride, and while arguing,
"Look at the huge payments we transfer to your taxi partners' accounts. These amounts are greater than the average salary in the country."
And the most important part is that this is hiding in plain sight. Everyone knows about it, yet nobody does a thing. Drivers are forced to work under fictional arrangements. As a result, the state budget, and more importantly, the drivers themselves, miss out on social contributions like pensions and healthcare. The state, meaning society, lose tax revenue because of this. Yet the regulatory bodies turn a blind eye. The law enforcement doesn't see that a driver behind the wheel for 40 hours straight, 6 days a week, is a public safety hazard. You don't need a PhD in law to see that something here is seriously shady. It's obvious that someone has a vested interest here. Whenever there is another fatal car accident involving an Uber driver, the authorities offer solutions to clean up the taxi sector that look something like this.
Tightening checks on taxi drivers to ensure they have all the proper documents. Stricter control over the condition of taxi vehicles and their authorization to operate. Proposals to introduce mandatory local language proficiency or requiring drivers to memorize local geography.
And so on and so on. But nowhere do they mention enforcing labor laws or cracking down on these payment and registration schemes, which completely contradict the spirit and logic of the law. And it is not just a one company. Other corporations in Poland use the exact same payment schemes for completed work. While I cannot directly, with absolute certainty, indict or prove that Uber and similar tech corporations are other masterminds and exploiters of this system, I can point the finger with absolute certainty at the responsible government agencies for their total inaction.